We're very lucky to be in Chicago for this presentation because you have such a distinguished record of worrying about this issue. This sign behind me is something you should all adopt, Cindy, immediately and help her with this campaign. How many of you in this room remember the Thomas versus the Kane County Chronicle case? This is amazing. You do? What do you remember about it? What do you remember about it? Well, in this case, this was a challenge to First Amendment rights of this little weekly newspaper in Kane County that was sued by the Supreme Court Justice of Illinois, and a verdict was returned because all the judges involved in the case had been influenced by the Chief Justice. And had it not been for some diligent a lawyer in Washington, of all places, this poor little newspaper might have never received any justice. It barely got any justice, but in the end, the lawyer filed a 1983 case, civil rights case, which Mr. Caperton has invoked here, the 14th Amendment. And this lawsuit was proceeding to the dismay of the judges involved in the civil Illinois case when the insurance company intervened and settled, paying the plaintiffs in the case some sum. A disgraceful comment on our money in politics, a more disgraceful comment on the sacrifice of the moral authority which judges, the courts, have to have in a free market system. Some years ago, one of your colleagues in Chicago, Richard Posner, I'm sure many of the lawyers in the room know Posner, but he was writing a piece for the World Bank, and Posner made this observation: markets are more robust than some market failure specialists believe, but their vigor depends on the establishment of an environment in which legal rights, especially property and contractual rights, are enforced and protected, an environment that is taken for granted in wealthy nations. Hugh Caperton has given you a great story about how that may be compromised when money, the super spenders, are at large in the world. Most of you are familiar with what happens in those cultures in which fiduciary office is subject to bribery, subject to being compromised by being bought. All of you may remember that simony, if I'm saying the word correctly, involved the sale of clerical office and provoked the Reformation. More recently, you've watched one business after another, journalists, bystanders, investment bankers in Russia, all victims of the kleptocracy that prevails in Russia. Buying justice, I don't even know the word applies. So you're forewarned. I hope I'm not offending anybody by saying that. And then, of course, then you see what's happening in many third world countries. And maybe you've read recently about the crony capitalism that is infectious in India. But it's not the only place. My company's own experience in Mexico, I have anecdotes to tell about that, but out of respect for Cindy's tight rein on this panel, I'm not going to tell it. The issue for us is, of course, how do we address the issues that arise out of the cases, of which Hugh represents one. But the Citizens United case really undermines whatever positives one might draw from Hugh's successful and valiant efforts to achieve vindication. Hugh, I think we could all listen to you talk about this case, and we'll arrange for you to speak nationwide for the rest of your life. I hope their honoraria sufficient to sustain your lovely family, which we're glad to hear is here today. You have to have some valiant person like this that will stick to the mission. This issue of an elected judiciary is one that I spend a lot of time on at the direction of Charlie Cobb and Mike Petro. And now I'm assigned to work with Bert in Justice at Stake, which has an underlying and fundamental role in talking about these issues, not only about money in politics, but about the compromise of our whole economic system, the free market system, the compromise of that system by judges that are paid for directly or indirectly. This is not necessarily the places to talk about that, because that's the way we live. I'm concerned to talk a little bit today because I'm gilding the lily that Hugh has already talked a little bit about today. And I've asked you all to go look at Thomas versus Kane County Chronicle for a terrible example of how this works, where First Amendment rights are compromised. And everybody in the newspaper business ought to read this case and moan. At the same time that Thomas was going forward in the Illinois courts, a similar case was pending in the state courts of Massachusetts, all of which involved elected judges, in which the judge felt that something was said about him in a campaign that damaged his reputation, and he sued the company responsible for the representations. These are cases that in your idle hours you can spend time moaning about. But I want to talk a little bit about the illusory promise of transparency, which is held out as somehow going to be the remedy for the excesses that we are concerned about today. And I'll just say a word or two about transparency and how difficult it is to know what it is, where it is, and how to get there. It's almost a platitude for people to suggest that transparency is the answer, because there's no arbiter of transparency except the very people, in the case of the judges, who are most subject to its corruption, to its oversight, they're being indifferent to it. However, a word or two before I turn over this opportunity to my colleagues about a couple of cases a couple of situations that every corporation ought to be thinking about. Sarbanes-Oxley, which most of the people in this room know about, and the burdens that Sarbanes-Oxley imposed on public companies, know that there was a peculiar kind of body created, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. I hope you get a chance to follow this thing, because what it does is it stirs up auditing firms to think that they have to be more aggressive in holding managements to a standard of disclosure that, if nothing else, protects the auditing firm. You must always start from that premise. How does this protect the auditing firm? This is a case where we're just beginning to see the results of its work. And interestingly enough, they're allowed to keep it secret. The Lehman Brothers and related matters we're concerned about are the subjects of investigation by this board. I'm not an expert on this. I'm sure there are people in this room that know more about it, and I defer entirely to them. And if you want to talk, I'll give up my remaining time so that you can come up here and talk about it. But this is a top-down way of dealing with transparency. We are in an environment now where audit committees of boards, risk management responsibilities in companies are going to be held to a higher standard. We don't know what that standard is yet. And so the efforts that are being made in meetings like this by all of you to ensure that those standards of disclosure, which is the fundamental bedrock of transparency, a top-down approach for audit committees that are managed truly by independent directors. They have to take a more aggressive role. And indeed, if you look, remember what happened to Target, where I was supposed to say Target, when they had adopted a plan to give some money to some group, which generated enormous controversy, not among stockholders necessarily, but among customers and vendors in the Target area. I'm not totally familiar with this case. I've been told it's something I should study more, but it's an example of how the company's support for a political group or a particular campaign hurt its merchandising, hurt its sales. And so I want to come then to the second part of transparency that's the more important for all of us to pay attention to, and this is the unbelievable growth in the social media. All around us are blogs, Twitters, the Lord only knows what name I can give to these things. And they are developing almost as fast as we can go from day to day. And they're very resourceful in finding out things, many things they don't even like. There was a piece in the Financial Times a couple of weeks ago on how do you manage the social media if it's saying bad things about you. So you have to have somebody on the staff of the corporation that is watching what the social media is doing about you. This is the same social media that if they find out that some corporation is giving money to somebody, will broadcast it widely, and it may come back to haunt you. So another bit is not only to be concerned about the audit committees of the boards or the accounting firms who want to make sure they're not at risk in this, is to think about what the people who are out there buying your merchandise, people who are just nosy about your affairs. And I would complete my observations on this by telling you that in 1999 my company was involved with a local municipality in trying to get a development project approved by the voters. We had all these pollsters told us this was just a slam dunk. Don't worry about it. You're on the side of the angels. This is economic development at its best. Now, this particular project involved possibly the inflow of a lot of foreign nationals from Mexico. We almost lost the election. The pollsters were dead wrong. Why? Because families around this project had organized chat rooms based on church groups, primarily of women who became involved with the idea that all these foreigners were going to endanger their neighborhoods and their tranquility and security. They were very successful, and nobody knew anything about their activity. Now, we know better today. So if I leave here with nothing more than this terrible warning about monitoring the social media about you and your company and your associates, don't forget the executives. One of the things that often happen, and I'm sure this happened with you, is that Massey paid this fellow a hell of a lot of money. And part of that money was paid to him with the idea that he was going to use it constructively with judges and politicians. And it is that risk to corporations that the social media will pick up and they say, well, old Landon Rowland, his company didn't give him any money, but old Landon Rowland gave him $100,000 or some other number. So it's very important, I say in closing, that the work of Cindy in Illinois is hugely important to this state. It's hugely important to the people that remember Thomas versus Kane County Chronicle. The work that Bert is doing with Justice at Stake has a more abiding feature. But to avoid falling into the trap of third world countries where the rule of law is compromised every day by kleptocracy, by crony capitalism, you have to have a way of arousing citizen interest in preserving the unsullied moral authority. The unsullied, is that okay? Unsullied moral authority of the courts. Thank you very much.